In previous lessons, we talked about using fraction of fraction models and fraction area models to help us multiply two fractions together. And if you'd like a review of those, you can go ahead and find those videos on my page. But ultimately looking at this, we would do some dividing up of a whole. In this case, it was a rectangle, and would we see, well, there's two parts shaded in here, so that told us that there were two parts, and out of the total number of parts, in this case, would be 6. So this one was 2/6. For the fraction area model, we kind of treated it like a coordinate grid where we'd go to the right, and that was 3/4. And then we go up, well, that was a half, and you can see that represented here at the problem. And we ended up with 3 sections shaded in out of a total of 8 sections. And many of you started to notice that if you would multiply the numerators together, you would get the parts shaded that were in the diagram. And same thing for the denominator. You notice that if you multiplied the denominators together, you would get the total number of pieces that made up the whole amount. And that's the more efficient way that we're going to multiply fractions today, is by just multiplying the numerators together and then multiplying the denominators together. For our first sample problem here, we've got 2/5 times 3/9. And like we mentioned before, a more efficient way to multiply fractions is to just multiply the numerators together and then multiply the denominators together. This is different than adding and subtracting. When we're adding and subtracting fractions, the two denominators have to be the same. For multiplication, that is not the case. So when we're thinking of 2/5 times 3/7, we could also think of it as 2 times 3 over 5 times 7, and then we would get the answer of 6/35. We could do the same thing with 1/4 times 3/8, and we could think 1 times 3 over 4 times 8, and that equals 3/32. As you can see, it's a much quicker way to do multiplying of fractions. But the other ones that we wanted to show you was just making sure that you're understanding why you got the answers you did when you're multiplying fractions. Let's do another problem. And let's say 2/3 times 3/6. 2/3 times 3/6. So again, it's going to be 2 times 3, just multiplying the numerators together, over 3 times 6, multiplying the denominators together, and we would get 6/18. Now in previous videos, we've talked about simplifying fractions, and sometimes teachers expect that. Oftentimes in our class, we just get to the original answer. But in this case, if you wanted to simplify the fraction to put it in its lowest terms or in its simplest form, both 6 and 18 can be divided by 6. So if we did 6 divided by 6, and my pen's not working here, if we did 6 divided by 6, we would get 1. And if we did 18 divided by 6, we would get 3. So 6/18 in simplest form is in 1/3. And if you'd like a more in-depth explanation of how to find simplest form, you can go ahead and watch my video about finding simplest form. Now I'm going to do one more problem here, and it might be a little bit confusing. And if you don't want to get confused, or if you don't need to take it any farther, I would just stop watching the video now. But for those of you who want to continue and just see a different strategy, go ahead and keep watching. This is not something that our 5th grade classroom is going to expect you to do. I'm not going to expect you to do that. So some of you like to to take your learning a little bit further. And we're going to start just 3/4 times 2/9 and think again how that's going to be 3 times 2 over 4 times 9. And then that's going to equal 6/36. In the previous videos, or in the previous portion of this video, we talked about taking one to simplest form, and if we made 6/36 into simplest form, it would end up being 1/6. It would end up being 1/6 because both 6 and 36 are divisible by 6. There's a way to have done this problem where we didn't need to do any simplifying, and we could do that down here. So we'd have start again with 3/4 times 2/9, and we could think of this again as 3 times 2 over 4 times 9. When we're doing problems like this, we know that for multiplication it doesn't matter what order you put it in. So we could think about changing the order and making it, instead of 3 times 2, we could do 2 times 3 over 4 times 9. Now, you might be wondering why I chose to do it that way, and here is the reason why. If you look, and we would turn these into fractions here, you could see that we could think of these in a different way. We could put these in simplest form, and we know that 2/4 is the same thing as 1/2, and we know that 3/9 is the same thing as 1/3. So now we could do 1/2 times 1/3, which would automatically take us to 1/6, and we wouldn't have to do any of the simplifying. Now there's a little bit more work, there's a little bit more thinking to that, but if that's something that you'd like to try, you can go ahead and do that. If you have any questions, please let your teacher know, and we'll talk to you in the next video.